So you may have seen the World War I video that I uploaded last month. I wanted to make this particular video as a sort of appendix to that one, as in that video I talked in depth about what was happening in the war, but I didn't talk much about the people who were leading the war. And that is important because in any war, it is not countries who command armies, but it is generals loyal to certain countries that command armies. Thus, the role of each individual general in a war cannot be forgotten, as often, their individual competences can make the difference between a victory and a loss. This video will serve as a catalog of not every French general during the war, but of each of the French generals that were at the time the Chief of the Army Staff, which is the highest position in the French army. The first man we'll be taking a look at today is Joseph Joffre, who is the war's most famous French commander. He actually took office as Chief of the Army Staff in 1911, several years before the war, which meant he had experience. Joffre was born in 1852 in a small town in southern France and had enrolled in the elite military polytechnic school at just 18 years old. The following year, however, the Franco-Prussian War would break out, and Joffre would take a quick break from his education, and served as a low-ranking officer in the French army during the Siege of Paris, in which France attempted to break the Prussian encirclement of Paris. In the end, when the war ended, Joffre would return to the school to finish his education, and return to the army after his graduation. Joffre participated in many colonial campaigns in both Indochina and Africa, which allowed him to quickly move up the ranks to become general. He would return to France in 1903 and took up several posts in the Ministry of War until he was appointed to the Superior War Council. In 1911, the War Minister Adolphe Messimy would reorganize the structure of the army, and in doing so would dismiss the current Chief of Staff, and centralize power into the office. The first two men Messimy wanted to become the new Chief of the Army Staff declined, so he then asked Joffre, who accepted and became the head of the French army at just 59 years old, which was considered quite young for the time. Ahead of the war, Joffre would work with General Ferdinand Foch to devise a plan to counter Germany's Schlieffen Plan. It would become known as Plan 17. And involved France rapidly mobilizing as the war began and quickly attacking Germany through Alsace-Lorraine before it could mobilize itself. French forces attempted to put this plan into action as the war began, but the dominating might of the German army prevented this plan from being accomplished, and France suffered early on in the war. What Joffre is most remembered for, however, is his actions during the First Battle of the Marne, when he ordered French troops to stop retreating at all costs and to attack the German line. Despite the struggles France had early on in the war, this idea proved a magnificent success and helped give Germany its first setback in the unfolding of a war. Joffre was widely lauded for his actions at the Battle of the Marne, and it wasn't unreasonable to believe that after this great success he would have remained Chief of Staff until the end of the war. That would not be the case, however. Joffre may have succeeded unquestionably at the Battle of the Marne, but after that he continued to struggle over and over again. As the trenches established themselves, he continued to call for offensives against German trenches in hopes of pushing back Germany, but his efforts mostly proved futile. Despite his lack of victory, he wasn't exactly losing either, so he continued to serve in leadership. This would change in 1916 with the dual disasters of Verdun and the Somme, which were just too awful to be ignored. In December, just before the Battle of Verdun came to an end, French leadership would ostentatiously promote Joffre to Marshal of France. But what they were really doing was giving him an advisorial role that brought him out of military affairs. Joffre soon resigned the position, but was still left out of military leadership. Having served 5 years, Joffre was the longest serving chief of the staff of the French army up to that point. Joffre did not depart in disgrace, however. In 1918, he would be appointed to the Académie Française and would remain in the army until 1922, when he retired, spending the last 9 years of his life in peace as a hero among the French people until his death in 1931. But who was to replace Joffre? Philippe Pétain, the general who had organized the defense of Verdun, seemed like an obvious choice, but it would not go to him. Instead, the honor would go to Robert Nivelle, who had successfully taken credit for the defense Pétain organized. However, Nivelle would not be given as much discretion as Joffre, and many of his decisions went under strict scrutiny by the Ministry of War. Nivelle had entered the French army in 1878 and had served with distinction in Tunisia, Algeria, and in the Boxer Rebellion in China. A notable fact about Nivelle is that unlike most of his Catholic colleagues, he was a Protestant, which both helped him avoid suspicion from the anti-clerical higher-ups of the French state and also helped his connections with the British forces. Nivelle's stint as head of the army would not last long, however. He supported further attacks to be made against Germany, thinking that they had been weakened after so many years of fighting. He would lead the Nivelle Offensive, which was named after him, which ended up being a great failure as France and Britain suffered over 100,000 casualties in the first week alone, at little gain, and even those stopped at the end of the first week. By the time the offensive came to an end, Nivelle would be transferred to be the head of the French forces in North Africa, while Pétain would become the new head of the army. Pétain would only hold the position for 3 weeks, however, serving as more of a caretaker until the next man could become chief of the army staff. Still, Pétain did many things throughout the war. The army was in a tough situation, as the failure that was the Nivelle offensive had triggered mass mutinies within the Allied armies. It was so serious that at their worst, these mutinies included half of all French divisions on the Western Front. Pétain attempted several strategies to quell the mutinies, utilizing both threats and his personal relation with many soldiers. He would first and foremost work to hide any information that these mutinies were occurring in the first place from the Germans. Then, he would attempt to get the mutineers back in line by raising their morale and providing rest to the most demoralized divisions. This by itself was not enough, and Pétain eventually resorted to using the law against dissenters, having 554 soldiers sentenced to death, although more than 90% of these sentences would be commuted. All of this was after the position of Chief of the Army Staff had already been passed to General Ferdinand Foch, who would hold the position until the war's end. He would also hold the position of Supreme Allied Commander from 1918 to 1920, the only person to hold such a title during the First World War. Foch had been a key figure in the war from its beginning, having been one of the devisers of Plan 17, and that did not change after he became chief. In his time in the position, Foch worked hard to maintain the integrity of the Western Front. He opposed British Prime Minister David Lloyd George's plan to send troops to Trieste to assist Italy, and he would work hard to prevent the Germans from splitting up the Allied troops during the Spring Offensive. He succeeded, which allowed Germany to be meaningfully pushed back for the first time since the Battle of Marne in 1914. Foch would be greatly recognized for his efforts. On the day of the armistice, he would be elected to the French Academy in Sciences. 10 days later, he would be appointed to the Académie Française along with General Joffre. Both Foch and Nivelle stayed in the French army for a couple of years, but retired in the early 1920s, spending their last few years in peace before their eventual deaths throughout the decade. Of the 4 generals who held command during this war, only Pétain would be alive by the early 1930s, and, well, yeah, I'll get to him in a video down the line. Overall, these 4 men and their different contributions shaped France's effort in the war more than any other men, and it is important to remember the efforts they made. If it weren't for them, the war may have ended very differently from how it did in our timeline. Thank you for watching. This video is a little different from my usual content, and I'm glad to those of you that made it all the way through to the end here. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, maybe comment, and I'll be back next time with more usual content.